There is a big chasm between building good and great products, and this is something only great product builders know. When I was early on in my career, I remember being in awe of certain folks who seemed to have nailed product positioning, the product experiences, and somehow had an immaculate ability to communicate how they did it. I always used to look forward up to them, and today we have with us one such individual. We are going to talk about what it takes to actually hit what I just discussed and what all happens behind the scenes. Today with us, we have Clement Kao, a principal product manager at Pano AI, the founder of Product Teacher, a community where the best in class product folks hang out. Clement has spent his career advising, teaching, and being a product manager at numerous companies such as Blend and Movoto, among others. Welcome to the show, Clement. How's life?
Thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be here. Life is pretty good. We just went through Lunar New Year, right? So it's very nice being able to hang back out with family, be able to catch up, take a break. But yeah, just, raring to go in terms of tackling product management again.
What do you typically do on Lunar New Year?
Yeah, fantastic question. So for Lunar New Year, because I'm actually like an Asian American, right? So my parents immigrated from Taiwan, and so I actually grew up here in the United States. I actually don't have a lot of things that I do during Lunar New Year, so this year was actually a little bit more special in that my wife and I actually went and hung out with a couple of friends here in Santa Clara. Super nice, ate hot pot, played card games, specifically code names, so that was a lot of fun. And then like called back home to parents, hung out. So yeah, it was just really nice and relaxing, and it was a lot deeper of a hangout than I've usually had kind of in previous years. So that was really nice. Yeah.
I love what you just described. It makes me nostalgic. I remember my childhood playing card games with families, and that used to be like something that I didn't find that intriguing back then. But now that I look back to it, I feel like that was probably the best way to having spent those holidays. And Codenames is a game that I absolutely love. So I'm glad. Are you a card game fanatic as well?
Great question. I'm actually pretty bad at card games and board games, so I just kind of struggled along, but it was fun. It was a really great time. So yeah.
Awesome. Clement, before we get into general introduction on how everything has happened on your career so far, I actually want to directly start with a question that most people don't have a very clear-cut answer on. I have myself spent time in product growth, design, and all sorts of roles. How does someone who has spent so much of time talking about product, and the reason I ask this to you is because whenever I'm thinking about how I want to broadcast the thought that I have in my head, I realize that it makes me better as a product thinker. My thoughts, when they are being translated into writing, it just clarifies a lot. Maybe it even helps me in my journey. How do you really define what a good product is?
Yeah, fantastic question. So for me, right, in terms of what a good product is, there's actually a couple of different pieces that we want to make sure that we break out, right? And so I want to make sure that we hit each of these pieces because each of them are incredibly important. Part number one, a product should create value for customers, right? I think it sounds super basic, but I think there are just so many different, attempted products out there where a lot of the focus is, hey, like I want to be able to get like $1 billion valuation. I want to be able to get all of this revenue, have all this retention without really understanding who are our customers and what is value to them, right? And so it's so important to think everything about my product has to be laser focused on who are my customers and what do they value, right? So first and foremost, a product must create value for customers. And then the second part is then captures that value for the business. And so the reason I mentioned this part is I have worked with people who were associate product managers at Google, Redfin, Microsoft, etc. And early on in your career, right, you're really focused on, hey, I really want to delight my customers. I really want to make my users super happy. And they forget that, well, a product is part of a business, right? And so you can do all sorts of things to delight a user, but if you're not actually feeding into the top line or the bottom line, that product's not sustainable, right? And so the second part to every product, right, is captures value for the business. And then the third and final part, and this is where things get really tricky, is in a scalable way, right? So you're not just doing something that's one-off that works for just the one customer. You're doing something that will scale and be redeployed customer to customer to customer in a way where you actually get to have this, kind of the classic zero marginal cost of distribution, right? Kind of all of these customers get to use the same copy of your product, right? Of course, like they get to use their own different configurations or whatever set they have, but ultimately they're all using essentially the same set of code. And the reason why I mentioned this is because you might have a product that is creating value for customers and is also capturing value for the business, but it's actually custom, right? Like you build like a custom website for a single customer and it doesn't work for another customer, so you build something else that's custom. Well, now you're a web dev shop, right? Like you're not actually building products. And so the hard part about product management is you have to hit all three of these pieces, right? You create value for customers, capture value for the business in a scalable way. Those three things are what make a truly amazing product that stands the test of time. So that's how I think about it.
Hi everyone, welcome to Just Crunch It. Here we talk about all things data, analytics, AI, and everything in between. Some very hard questions, some honest answers. This is for you if you are just getting started, or for that matter, if you're an expert in anything related to data and data science. This is for you even if you're feeling left behind in this ever-evolving world of new technologies, the advancement of AI and whatnot. Wow. So I heard a lot of things there. Marginal cost of distribution is one thing which is very easy to decipher from the sidelines, but when you're actually trying to do it, it becomes very tricky. And then you talked about what I think is niches, as in like go niche, don't try to go to everyone. But I have a question for you. So you hang
Yeah,
out with a lot of people, right? Like, and today you also talked about build something that users really care about, and try affecting the top line if you can, because without that, actually the product doesn't make sense. And most people who are early, young on in their career, they look at these inspirations from random places, whatever, and they're all good products. But actually trying and replicating that or taking inspiration from some experience into a product makes the product be a good one, but actually no one uses it. And if no one uses it, the business goes nowhere. Now, the question I have here is, today we are in the age of AI, right? Like, and this is something that I spend a lot
totally.
of time sleeping about. A few years back, when I was at my previous company in my first role at Sprinkler, we had this whole domain of sentiment analysis, and it was a big deal. Everyone wanted to know the sentiment on a broader chunk of messages that were coming in from their customers, the social media posts, like the product feedback, reviews on products like G2, and so on. And a bunch of startups became really big, right? Like, because they were doing sentiment
Totally.
analysis very well. Well, that made sense back then. And then came ChatGPT, and suddenly everything that these companies were doing is now no longer a big deal. And as a product builder,
Yeah.
as a founder, more so, I keep thinking about how do we prepare for that future today? Because maybe we have control over what users want, but a part of building sustainable business now has also come to sort of predicting or factoring in where the tech may evolve. Do you consider that as like a big aspect today, or has that happened in the last 2 years? What's your take on that?
Yeah, fantastic question. I think I've definitely seen lots of different waves of things kind of happening over time, right? Kind of even before ChatGPT, at some point in time, the entire rage for everyone was chatbots. And this was pre-AI, right? Just like, hey, I have some chatbot interface thing, right? And so in that way, that helps to like reduce customer support times. A lot of people at some point in time said, hey, we really want to make sure that we have this, open ecosystem of APIs. And so everyone was publishing like external APIs, and that was all the rage for a period of time. Blockchain was all the rage for another period of time. So I've definitely seen kind of these different waves of different trends come in. The thing that I would say is the most important, right, is to not, how do I put this? Is to not react with fear, but instead to react with curiosity as each of these things are coming in. Right? And I think that's why it's so important that product is actually building this really tight relationship with its, technical subject matter experts, engineering, right? Kind of they're the ones who see, oh, well, these are kind of like the new technologies that are coming. And let's sit down with product and figure out how do we actually identify what is the kind of unsolved value that our customers are looking for that we can imagine up that they don't know about yet, right? And so I
Yeah.
think it's really important that every product person, right, is kind of reserving just a little bit of exploration time, but like still have that exploration time every sprint or every month or every quarter, whatever that is, and make sure that you're looking out into, well, what's new in tech? And is there something here that we can actually bring in? Or is it still, way too early, or is this very much a bubble? It doesn't really matter for our customers, and that's totally okay, right? And so that's really how I would think about it. Of there's no one single thing that like completely ruins the business, or like something that you act way too late. I've been around product for a while, and so there was a whole period of time when everyone said you have to build mobile, you have to build mobile apps. Like mobile apps were like a huge deal. There were so many conferences on mobile, etc. And that's died down now. Like, kind of just everyone accepts your website should be mobile responsive, and also if you have these dedicated on-the-go use cases, you need a mobile app, right? And so similarly, I believe AI is going to be a part of product the way that APIs are a part of product, right? It's standard, it's core to the value. And so it's not something that we should be shying away from, but it's also not something where it's going to be, hey, my entire company is now at risk. My entire product is now at risk. It's more, we now have the ability to take the superpower and transform it into even more fine-tuned superpowers for each of our customers, right? And so that's really how I think about this new wave of AI. It's incredibly exciting, right? But we need to make sure that we're taking our time to sit down and think about what is the actual value that this is unlocking, rather than just kind of doing it for the sake of doing it, right? So yeah,
Yeah, I want to get back to that at a later point of time during our talk.
totally,
AI as API, when you mentioned that, I think essentially a lot of people today are still not just accepting that this is going to be the way forward and then building on top of it, which may actually be derailing them from their path, because somewhere in
yeah,
the mind, it's still about, hey, this is all just not true. There may be in denial, and we'll touch base on that. But before I go there, I
sure,
think it would not be fair to not let the audience know how did Clement become Clement. Like, you have 39,000 followers on LinkedIn. You have, how does someone go about building? How has your career evolved in general? Like, what happened? How did things shape up? Did you always have it planned out? Did it happen on its own? What are you thinking about? Where is your life headed to? What are you trying to get? Like, there's a lot of question in there, but basically I'm just trying to understand, how
totally.
did you become you? Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic question. So I think a couple of things that I want to make sure that I get out of the way first and foremost is I did not start in product management, right? I think there's a lot of folks who kind of assume like, oh, a lot of really strong product people began in product. I actually think that I'm strong in product because I didn't start in product, right? Like I actually began my career on a customer facing role, right? I was actually very much, I was a data analytics consultant at MasterCard, right? And so like really helping customers better understand, how do I use my data? Like how do I actually drive insights from it? And actually being on the front lines of seeing how software interacts with customers makes you so much more empathetic when you're actually the one who's building the product, right? So that's one thing I want to get out of the way first. The other thing I want to get out of the way is a good product manager doesn't need to know how to code, right? And so I graduated, back in 2014 with a double major in molecular and cell biology, which has nothing to do with product management. And then the other one was business administration, right? And so I can't code, right? Like I might be able to read a little bit of code, or I can like write my like very basic SQL queries I'm very embarrassed by, but I don't need to know how to code, because as long as you understand that, hey, I'm partnering with, some absolutely brilliant people in engineering, let's figure out kind of how to understand what are their pain points, how do we amplify their work. You don't need to know how to code to have a good conversation with them, right? And so that's something that I also want to make sure I get out of the way. Yeah, so those are just like two things to first put out there. But kind of to take a step back, like, what does that career trajectory look like of Clement? As I mentioned, when I graduated from college, I did not know what the hell I was doing. It was just double major business and biology, right? Like I can't go into any research labs because the business part doesn't make any sense, right? And like, I'm not going to be an accountant because that also doesn't make sense. What am I going to do with the biology part? And so I was very lucky to have stumbled on, this local consulting firm called Applied Predictive Technologies, APT. And basically what they did was they had these, PhD level statisticians build kind of all of this software to ingest, terabytes of transaction level data from cash registers, and then working with customers like McDonald's, Starbucks, et cetera, to run real world experiments, right? Basically, hey, if you change the menu prices, if you change your opening hours, if you change staffing, how does that actually change things? Test versus control. Like kind of back then, I think a lot of software folks already understood the point of A/B testing and test versus control, but a lot of more legacy organizations didn't, right? And so I was honestly so lucky to have this first role because it gave me, these really important skill sets that I still draw on day to day the entire time, right? Part one, as a consultant, you will always be interfacing with executives, right? And so it's just having to have gone through talking to like VPs of marketing and like CEOs, et cetera, it just makes it a lot easier for me to talk with my customers. It makes it a lot easier for me to talk with my own internal executives, right? So that was incredibly valuable. The second part that was super valuable was just actually getting really deep into the data and actually like running the SQL queries, figuring out like the data pipes for, how do I take something from like, this like FTP and then stick it somewhere in some database and like get insights out of it, and, like run these scripts, etc. So that was also really valuable. The third part that was really valuable is actually working alongside software to deliver the consulting, right? So basically, hey, McDonald's is running this particular experiment, right? Well, we have all the cash register transactions, etc. And now there's like this dashboard inside whatever product that we're providing. Now, let me go ahead and as a consultant recommend, hey, you should run these other kinds of experiments instead. And here's why it's going to unlock additional bottom line value for you, right? And because I was interacting so closely through the software to advise my customers on like, you should run these experiments versus not, that's how I started to get a taste of what is scalable delight, right? And what I mean by that is the software was written by PhD statisticians, but the end users are not PhD statisticians. They're marketing analysts, they're operations analysts, right? And so every time they're like, oh, this particular control method has these biases, like all these pages of error messages, they freak out. They're like, I don't know what the heck this is telling me. I feel really scared and really concerned, right? And for us, yes, part of the way that we were able to drive revenue is, oh, well, because this page is so scary, you need a consultant, right? And so like that's how I made my money, right? Of like, hey, let me walk you through this stuff. But I was thinking, well, this doesn't make any sense. Every day, I spend 3 to 4 hours on the phone talking through with my customers about this is what this page means and here's why. Why can't we just make the software do it, right? So I accidentally became a UX researcher right there because I don't know why we're spending, hundreds of consultants' time in terms of like 3 to 4 hours a day just doing like basic tech support. The software should just do it, right? And so I kind of brought all these insights back from all of these calls and I put it in front of our engineers, I put it in front of our design team and said, hey, here's what people are trying to do. Here's where we're failing them. Can we change this somehow? Please, like I have customers and like we can run tests by them, right? So I kind of accidentally by firsthand experience and like a mix of like first principles figured out, oh, I can do UX research, right? And so like that's kind of how I got started towards the path of product management. But at that point I wasn't a product manager. From there, then I hopped over to Movoto, where they were looking to break into a totally new market, right? Basically, hey, right now, we as Movoto, it's like a real estate brokerage. So think of it like a much smaller version of like a Redfin, right? Just like a much smaller, much more local version. We know how to help people buy homes, but we're not quite sure how to help people sell homes. And Clement, you've done all of this like research before on like how do you find new customer segments and how do you help them succeed, etc. Come over and work with us on this, right? So that's what I did, right? I did hundreds of customer interviews, did all of these surveys, gathered hundreds of thousands of data points, like crunched all of these numbers, came up with these like different like personas of like users and like value propositions and like hypotheses, etc. And then my exec team was like, okay, great, thanks for doing the research. We're gonna put this on the shelf and move on. I said, what? This doesn't make any sense, right? Like we spent all of this time finding this underserved population that has all of these pains that no one else is going after, and you're not going to do anything with it? I was like, oh, well, because it's too different, right? Like we don't know how to do this stuff, right? Like we thought maybe there was like low-hanging fruit, we could go do it. I said, no, absolutely not, right? Like look at we already understand these kinds of people's pain points. We already have these core capabilities that no one else has. We can serve them better than anyone else can, right? And so from there, I went rogue. Instead of continuing to do additional UX research, I said, well, now I'm going to pitch this idea, right? Like we need to go serve these customers because clearly we can make a lot of money by doing so. We can solve a lot of pain, right? I did all of the SWOT research, right? Kind of like looking at like the different markets, looking at competitors, looking at like how like all these different plans and like doing financial forecasts and whatever using my ex consulting skills. And I finally convinced my executive team after one too many one-on-ones. I'm like, oh my God, Clement, stop, just fine, let's go do it, right? And so we did it. But the challenge there is just that, what's it called? The challenge there is that our product team wasn't ready to handle that because they're so used to working with home buyers, right? Like how do we work with home sellers? And at that point in time, I didn't think of myself as a product manager. I was just like, I'm just the weird UX researcher guy who just does stuff. And I don't know how to code. I don't know how to design, right? So like y'all should go find some product person to go lead this initiative. And the CEO was like, well, I'm not going to do that because finding a product manager is hard and expensive. And no one else on the team wants to go do it. And clearly, Clement, you're very passionate about this. Why don't you just be the product manager for this initiative? I'm like, you're crazy. I don't know anything about anything. He said, look, I get that you're concerned, but why don't you take 1 week to go shadow engineering and 1 week to go shadow design, and then we'll make you into an associate product manager, and then off you go. So we did that. And so that is how I became an APM. I went and I shadowed design for that 1 week, right? Like learned all this stuff about like kerning and typography and like, what do all of these different like modals and dropdowns mean? And I had that 1 week, sitting with engineering to understand like what are rollbacks and what are, code reviews and merges and QA and all of this stuff that I didn't know about before. And I became an associate product manager with no training, no guidance. I just kind of like winged it. And I was very freaked out because, there was no one else that I was really working closely with because everyone else was on the buyer side, right? I was the only product person on the seller side. But my CEO was right because within less than 6 months, we were able to launch this product that wound up earning more revenue than the entire rest of the company. And that rest of the company had been around for 11 years. And in 6 months, I was able to unlock more revenue than all of them combined, right? Because this was a real opportunity where no one was operating and we knocked it out of the park, right? So because of that, during my time at Movoto, I just like quickly rose the ranks up to like group product manager, just like, working through all of these different real estate transactions and like really helping consumers succeed. So that's kind of my journey into product management. Where like, yes, like there's other stuff in terms of like how I got to Blend, how I got to product teacher. But just pausing there, right? Kind of that's my journey into product. And the core thing that I want people to take away from it is I planned none of it, right? And so anyone who's planning their careers in product management have a very strong lead ahead of me, right? Like I did not know what the heck I was doing. And so everyone else who knows that they want to be a product manager, they are miles and miles ahead of where I was back then. Right? And so just that's something that should make people feel very good about where they are because they already have the desire and they already know that this is the direction that they want to go. I literally fought my CEO for 3 weeks saying, I don't want to be a product manager. I'm scared. I don't know what I'm doing. And I could have been in a much better spot if I knew that I wanted to be a product manager in the first place, right? So everyone who's listening right now, you have a head start against me, right? Like that is just real. And for context, I have published 3 books on product management. You have a head start on me, right? So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I see a theme recurring, and which is very strong. I would say it's a very strong trait for anyone who wants to venture into being a good product person, whether you are a product manager or in whatever role. I see you started with when you were talking about the 2 disclaimers initially. You talked about how you were in a customer facing role initially, right? Like, and that chatting with customers becomes so key. And I'm going to admit it here on record as well that even today, when I am like, so I have heard people say, go talk to users. I have a design background. So, of course, I know what UX research is and how important it is. I have told and gone and shouted at people who have not done UX research. But today, when I am myself building a product, it's so easy to get lost into all the nitty gritty. So you do customer research, you figure out what they're doing, and then now you have some points to think about. And when you actually start thinking about those points, you go into a tangential direction which has nothing to do with whatever your research with users had to do. And it's an active effort on a day-to-day basis to ensure that okay, you are not. So that is a statement that I, as a product person, have always underrated. And now I see why so many companies struggle to do something which is so obvious that go talk to users who you're building for and then build something for them. The second thing I also see very strongly in your career trajectory, Clement, is that you had a very strong bias towards actually affecting that top line. Like every word you were talking about, hey, how is it going to bring in money to the company? Can it become a big product? And that is also something which is very, very, very important to understand. It took me a while in my own career to see that the people who were having exponential career growth were the people who were not actually just very good friends with the leadership because the leadership is smart enough. They were actually the people who were able to impact the most. And there would be all
Yeah.
sorts of discussions around, oh, he or she is just getting favored. They are like just in an advantageous position. We don't get to hang out. But even the smallest of the things, like the person who's actually going on doing that international research, flying across all the countries on a company sponsored trip, they're not just going there because they're maybe better or closer to the someone who's making a decision. They're going there because they have proved in the past that, hey, here is how I will actually end up affecting your top line. All that research is probably worth nothing if the business doesn't survive. And more so in
Exactly.
early stage, like one of the biggest learnings I had was I was spending a lot of time around okay, let's build the best culture. We see Google operating like this. We see the best of the companies in the world and employees crave about that. Let's build that culture. And if that attempt of building that culture leads to a lack of focus or you getting deviated from how the business is actually going to sustain, there is probably going to be no business to sustain tomorrow. And then all the culture that you're
Right.
building is probably not worth anything. So that's that. But Clement, I want to quickly touch base on one thing which we didn't talk about. How did your audience get developed? Was it because you were just sharing all of these things, or did that also happen in an unplanned way? Like
Yeah,
how do you have
fantastic
29,000
question.
followers? Yeah.
Yeah, and so the reason why I stopped my answer before is because this is actually a long block of discussion itself. There's actually quite a bit that I want to share about, because I think a lot of times people will say, oh, like, Clement, you have so many followers, right? Like you have, all these, like, people who visit the website, you have all these people who read your newsletter, right? Like I want to be able to get that, right? It's like, like I want to promote myself. But something that I want to make really clear is the way that I wound up growing that following was, again, by accident, right? And so kind of similar to how I accidentally became a product manager, I also accidentally grew a following, and it was not my intention to do so. The way that I actually got started was back when I was at Movoto, being a product manager for the very first time. I was terrified out of my mind. I am running this business I know nothing about. There are so many smarter people out there, and I just don't know like the first thing about product management. And so I spent all of this time going to conferences, reading books, listening to podcasts, whatever, trying to figure out like what the heck is product management. And I finally got to the point where I started feeling a little bit better about how I could do product. And funnily enough, around that point in time, some of my friends started noticing like, oh, Clement, you're formerly a product manager, and I kind of want to be one. Can you talk to me about it? Right? And so people would like reach out over email and schedule a phone call, and I would tell them all these different things. And one of the things that I noticed is after my, seventh phone call, maybe, there are a lot of things that we talk about that are always the same, right? Like, how do you work with engineering? How do you work with design? How are you writing your product specs? How are you talking to users? Like, we always had the same conversation topics. And I thought, well, it's kind of odd that everyone's got the same set of questions, and I always have to repeat myself. It is kind of tiring. Why don't I just put all these things down, just write them all down and stick them into an email, right? So every time someone says, hey, I want to call Clement to learn about his career, I'm going to send them an email that has all this information about how I did it, and here's what I'm doing. Read the email first, and then let's get on the phone, right? And so that's kind of how I started to publish, even though I wasn't actually publishing. And so it turns out that that email was like some of the most valuable things that people were getting. And they said, actually, I don't have any more questions. We don't even need to get on the phone anymore. And I thought, well, it's kind of unfair that you need to know me to get access to this information, right? It's just, that's not fair. And I don't like that. And so I pushed myself. I'm going to put this information somewhere, right? Because I don't want to be the gatekeeper. So I put, a couple of articles up on a blog, and it was just like, hey, here's what I know about product management, right? Like, here is just like the information that I know about. And through there, people actually started to read and started to ask me for other topics. They're like, hey, you covered this thing really well, but what about this thing? I'm like, oh, that's a really great question. I should answer that too. And so it wound up being kind of this like self-reinforcing feedback loop where I would learn about something at work, and then I would write about it, which would crystallize that knowledge, right? Which was just so valuable because it made me so much stronger as a product manager, right? Crystallizing that knowledge and really understanding, why do these different things work together? When do these rules stop working, right? Kind of like getting really into the nitty gritty and making sure that I'm not just talking about frameworks at a high level, but here's how I did it, right? And here's why it worked for me, and here's where it didn't work for me, and here's the things that you should do to avoid so you don't make mistakes that I did, right? And so really trying to blend together both the theoretical framework as well as like, here's like the actual practical anecdote for how I went through it, right? And once I had that, then people would read it and they would ask me questions, which then made me go research it and get even stronger. And so like this kind of like spun on itself. And I think the ultimate kernel for all of this is something that's really odd is when I hear about other people saying, I want a following, when they post something, many times they don't know what to post about, right? Like they'll say like, oh, like I want to talk about this interesting project that I did, or like I want to talk about like this one thing that I learned, but it's not solving a problem, right? So one of the things that I want to make really clear, content is product, right? Every piece of content needs to have product market fit. It needs to know who are the customers that we're going after, what creates value for them, right? And as soon as you have that, everything becomes so much easier. It's so much easier to know if I'm writing for someone who was a data analyst trying to become a product manager, right? And they have this particular pain point, that's so much easier to write for than to write for everyone. And similarly, it's so much easier to write for a VP of product who's trying to guide their team through some change, knowing that that is your persona rather than just writing for everyone, right? And so for me, I was so lucky that people reached out and asked me for help, and I forced myself to go write about it, right? That's what actually went and created kind of this positive feedback loop. And so the reason why I believe I have a following, right? It's not like, it's not something that I've tried to grow, right? Like I don't really have a lot of, let's say, partnerships out there. I don't do a lot of, let's say, like sponsorships with other newsletters or what have you. It just kind of grows over time for no reason outside of just me enjoying doing it. And I think a lot of the reason is because I'm trying to solve someone's problem, right? It's like, hey, Clement, I have this question. I don't get how this thing works. And it's like, hey, that's a really good question. And I know that other people have this question. Here's how this thing works. And here's where I screwed up. And here's why you can avoid that. And once that's out there, that's evergreen. Like that is a scalable solution to a problem. And people come back to it over and over again, right? I have people who have literally become VPs of product 6 years after reading my first piece of content. And they say, Clement, I'm still reading that piece of content. I'm still telling my associate product managers, go read Clement's article on this thing because it helped me and it's going to help you, right? And so for me, I think that's really kind of the core test. This will sound very contrarian, right? But I don't look at the number of likes that I get. I don't look at follows. I don't look at, I don't really look at web traffic at all. The way that I measure success of my content is how many times do people reach out to me unsolicited and say, you changed my career, right? Like that is the thing that I'm actually measuring myself on. If someone reaches out because I've changed their career, I have done my job as like a content creator, right? And so that's really how I see it, is my content should solve a pain so deeply that it solves the pain not just for them, but for everyone else that they're going to be working with who's got the same problem, right? And so that's kind of how that following grew, I guess.
Yeah.
Not because I really tried for it. So hopefully that's helpful as people think about how am I going to grow a following, is really make sure that you're solving a problem for somebody, even if that somebody is you, right? I think for me, like even just getting started, it was so helpful for me just to document for like past Clement, who is a consultant, who is now a product manager and doesn't know the first thing about product management. Here's what I wish I knew, and here's why I wish I knew it, and here's how I screwed up, etc. Right? And there are so many people who are just like me. Like I can't tell you the number of times I have had consultants reach out and say, Clement, I noticed you used to be a consultant and now you're a product manager. I want to be the same. And I was like, oh, great. I wrote for myself to try to do that transition in the past. Here it is. Here's all of the knowledge that I wish I had. Best of luck. Let me know how I can help. Right? And so that has just been such an incredibly gratifying journey. Where it's great to have more of that reach. But I think the goal of the reach is not the reach. The goal of the reach is to find that value for customers and solve that for them. Like really make sure that I'm understanding a problem and having that scalable solution for them. So
I love that. Content is product, that whole framework. And I think maybe you can actually build more following if you start talking about how you built a following, because today everyone wants to be an influencer. And I remember asking this question to a lot of people initially, and I would always get the response, hey, you know what? I didn't plan it. And I was like, sure, you can say that today now that you have an audience. But I relate to what you're saying. And I've seen like actually approaching content as product, or for that matter, sometimes the mistake part that you talked about, where you're just being authentic, you're telling people, hey, I was actually like you. And for all of those people, drawing parallel from what you just said a while back about you didn't plan on being a product manager, and if someone is planning to be a product manager, they are steps ahead of you. Today, if someone is planning to actually build that audience, they are also steps ahead of you, and they just have to like
absolutely,
do a
yes.
few things well, and they can unlock so much of it. I love it. I think you should totally probably publish a book on how to also build your own audience. It would be lovely.
One of
And
these days. One of these days.
I'm a big fan of, by the way. I've gone through your books. I really like it. Publishing book is something I hope to do myself one day. It's just that there's probably a chasm where you are, it just scares you initially that, okay, how am I going to write this much of content in one go? But I think if I just compile it well, you can do it. But Clement, I want to switch gears here to something
Totally.
which is a little more relevant to established leaders as well. So we've talked a lot about people who are getting started in data science, product management, career in general, and so on. And for the last, I would say 1.5, 2 months, I have actually been talking to about 25, 30 people every week. These are all established leaders. It's a lot of effort. It's a lot of travel in the Bay Area, which is sometimes painful because the first meeting you have is in San Francisco City, the second is in Santa Clara, and then you're just commuting so many miles. But ultimately, what I'm realizing is that there is this sense of companies feeling left out. These leaders are now suddenly realizing that, okay, when cloud came in, it was okay for people to migrate to cloud slowly. So even a decade later, there are companies that have these digital transformation officers who are sort of helping them, and these companies have done just fine. But today with AI, it's almost becoming a competitive disadvantage, as in you have a team of 10 people and you probably can save a lot of operational cost if you just outsource some of it to AI. And of course, you need to like be a little proficient because AI itself is young today. But in these companies, there was this general realization that even established leaders, and I'm not going to name anyone in particular, but VPs, SVPs as well, feeling that the way things are changing, it has reached a pace where something that was not a threat or is not a threat today can become a threat a year later as well. Now, you have interacted with a lot of tech, non-tech players. You talked about the top line. You talked about how to approach business. And this probably is a little more true for companies that are non-digitally native, the ones that you don't think of as being SaaS companies, relatively more. To a leader of an established company listening today and feeling left out, how do you think they should approach this whole transition to being left behind from there to going to a position of leverage in this age of AI? Like, what are these big steps? Because these companies are massive. They have tons of orgs. There is like a bureaucracy. Things take 5 years to get deployed in certain weird scenarios. So how should they approach it?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And actually, I'm going to be drawing from my own experiences working with a lot of orgs that are just like that, right? And so for context, back when I was working at Blend, right, what does Blend do? Blend basically builds online loan origination platforms for banks. US Bank, Wells Fargo are like a couple of like the big names, right? And they had the exact same problem that you're saying right now. Like kind of for them, it's, hey, we have a lot of customers who are going online now, and we don't have an online presence. We have spent millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of headcount trying to build some sort of like internal, we're going to build our own website tool for consumers, and it just doesn't work, right? Like every time they do it, it doesn't work. And so the thing that I really learned at Blend is a lot of times the best way to actually drive that change for, you know, this large organization that's not digitally native is not to try to force themselves to become a digital native, right? To be really clear, each of these giants that are out in the field, they became giants for a really good reason, right? And so trying to become a digital native removes some of that reason, right? Which sounds almost insane, right? It's like, oh, but digital is so important. Well, yes, for sure. But one of the amazing things about just capitalism and just about, you know, trade in general is you can cross specialize by just partnering with other people, right? And so all of these banks, right, they are amazing, right? Like they have, you know, billions of dollars of assets under management. They are giants, right? And so like Blend is not going to be a lender. Like we're never going to be able to compete with them. But we really know how to build a consumer friendly interface, right? Like that is the thing that we know how to do. And we've done it for dozens and dozens and dozens of lenders. And so instead of each lender trying to reinvent the wheel on their own, right? Why not go partner with someone, right? Like why not go look for someone that is already solving the problem that you've solved and they're doing it at scale. And you don't have to maintain this competitive advantage. It's something that you can partner with this external party in terms of being able to do, right? And so I think a lot of times, right, when it is, hey, we want to be able to create some sort of web portal for consumers, right? Like there are so many different organizations and vendors out there that can do that for you because they've done that for kind of all these different things, right? I'm sure that, you know, even in terms of what you're currently tackling, right? In terms of, hey, we have all of this data on hand and we don't know the first thing about like, what are we going to do with this data? I know because I used to work at Flextronics, which, you know, generated terabytes of data from its factories, right? And they didn't do anything with it back when I was interning there, right? It's just like, it's scary. It's a lot, right? And if we're trying to do this thing for the first time, there is so much friction, right? Like, how do we even get started? But if you partner with someone who has done it so many times, like quite literally, this is the only thing that they do because they don't do it, they're going to go out of business, right? If you partner with someone who is laser focused on that one thing, you're going to go way farther, right? And so I think a lot of times I think many leaders understand kind of almost academically the concept of build versus buy. But when it comes to these like transformational capabilities, I think a lot of leaders have this implicit bias that they have to build it themselves. And I really want to challenge that thought process, right? Yeah. Of, are you sure that you have to build this yourself, right? Because it's not so much, hey, you know, I am afraid that I'm going to be giving away like this thing. I'm going to be totally dependent on someone else. It's no. If you let someone else focus on this aspect, then you can take your team and up-level them even further to build on top of what they're providing you, right? Like that is your secret sauce, right? And so by partnering with others, you're actually going to be going so much farther by working alongside these other, you know, solution providers, right? And so, you know, another, you know, real example of this is when you think about, you know, let's say that I am a firefighting agency, right? As a firefighting agency, I am really good at fighting fires, right? Like that's the thing I'm really good at. But maybe I don't have my own cameras in place. Maybe I don't have my own AI algorithms in place to be able to look out of these cameras and say, hey, where's their fire, right? And so instead of trying to do this yourself, right, look for someone who's already done it. And that's the only thing that they do. And they do it for lots of other people. Partner with them, right? Because then they're going to be able to handle all of these different things. And this headache is no longer yours to worry about. Like you can go focus on the thing that you are fantastic at doing and continue to double down on that identity, right? And so, you know, whether it is, hey, I don't feel great about the way that our supply chain work is going right now. Well, find someone who is really focused on supply chain, right? Like, hey, I'm not really sure that, you know, I feel comfortable with the way that we are extracting insights. Well, go work with someone who is like in deep learning and like, you know, have them help you out there. If it's, hey, you know, I don't really feel great about the way that we're doing marketing. Well, use a marketing solution provider, right? And if there are all these different ways that you can work alongside someone else at a significantly cheaper cost, right? Like, yes, it is expensive to have licenses, etc. But it is way less expensive than you trying to build an internal team on your own where they don't have the blueprint for how we should be doing these things and then hope that you get the result when there's already a market-ready solution for you to use right now. Right? And so I think that's actually one of the things that I think is like so cool about SaaS in general is there are so many specialists out there that you can rely on to wire together a truly world-class like end-to-end business without you having to own each of these pieces yourself. And the even better thing, because when you're working with a SaaS company, and I totally realize that, you know, I'm a little bit throwing SaaS providers under the bus. When you are their customer, you get to apply so much more pressure than on your own internal teammates, right? It's like, hey, you know, I own this department, and yes, in theory, I control their careers, but like a lot of times I'm not going to do this thing. But when you talk to someone where you're the customer, and it's like, hey, if you don't do this thing, I'm terminating the contract, they pay attention, right? And so it is so much easier to partner with a SaaS provider to unlock these core capabilities that you're worried about building in-house. That is so much more powerful for that organization. So that's something I really, you know, just recapping this entire spiel for leaders at quote unquote, like, you know, non-digitally native. First thing, you don't have to be a digital native to win. Second thing, don't feel like you have to build it yourself. You can definitely buy that capability. And that is something that will help you run a lot farther than you might expect. I've seen it firsthand again and again at large financial institutions with billions of dollars under management. And so I know that it works. So there are my thoughts there.
Yeah, I love it. And I have so many things to add on top of that. You see these, so I have been studying data companies, of course, given that we crunch
Of
ourselves
course.
as a team operates in data. And it's very interesting when you say build versus buy, even the giants, like you name any 10 companies that are like probably the biggest names when it comes to revenue, ARR, however you want to go for it, you will see that they don't talk about AI as much. So I was like, okay, is that because AI is inaccurate? Or if they talk about AI, it's like in a corner on one of the particular pages in a bottom right corner, they're saying, oh, we also have this AI capabilities. They're experimenting very slowly, right? Like, and I was wondering why is that? So I hit some of these leaders at these companies saying, guys, what's up? Why are you not talking publicly about it? And I realized that their mentality as well is that we will keep on doing what we do best. We will let these new companies that are coming up, and all of these new companies, we are one of them,
Totally.
they are all in about AI. They don't talk about the traditional stuff that these established data players have, where you're talking about data lakes, warehouses, and so on. And I was like, okay, but why isn't that going to be a competitive disadvantage? And they were like, no, when we have realized that a smaller player has cracked what exactly it is, they are going through service route, they're actually targeting these big companies, they understand that these big companies are going to be hesitant, so they go in not just as a product, they go in and say, we're going to do laundry cleaning for you. We ourselves position like that, which is wherein we go in and say, okay,
Yeah,
we'll build
totally.
custom things for you. And someday one of these smaller companies is going to become big enough, and then a bigger company, which is like the traditional data giant, is just going to come and acquire them. It's a win-win for both of
Yeah,
them, because the other company didn't have to like change their playbook a lot. They kept on doing what they were really good at. The smaller company cracked the AI code, which is why when you say about partnerships, I think there is a lot to be said even in these smaller names. And I have 20, 30, 40 of them that are really good. Like they're all at 10 million, 20 million in ARR, 15 million in ARR, which is not a smaller number. It's not big enough, but 10 million in ARR is very tough to get to. If you are a founder, you understand
totally.
the
Yeah,
importance of that. So that's that. But I have one question for you, Clement. Now we'll flip the side for
totally.
these smaller companies that are building these new age AI products. You see, when we talk about data, let me try summarizing it. It's going to get intense, but there is a data lake wherein you have dump of everything that is coming in. From there, the data moves to a warehouse. If you're a big company, this is most likely true. This warehouse is where now there's a business question. You try mapping it to the raw data terms. So you need probably something on the lines of a semantic map, whatever. Like someone, it's a human being sometimes who is actually factoring in the question that is being asked in business term. How does that map to the raw data term? Then there is whole aspect of cleaning data, querying data, processing data. Data teams spend as much as 90% of their time actually just hypothesizing what is to be queried, whether that data is ready to be queried or not, and they hate it. I've talked to them, they don't like it. They're like, this is not intellectual enough for us.
Totally.
But
Yeah.
these companies, when they go to the market, the new age companies, where they go in and say, hey, we have an LLM capability which sort of doesn't need you to go into the old school way of actually going through step by step. You could save 90% of the time, 80% of the time. The world has kind of worked against these companies. And what I mean by that is when ChatGPT came, when GPT-4 came, and it will probably continue because there are newer models that are coming in every day. There's a whole bunch of really average solutions that go out in the market and they just ruin it. Like today we are in an age where
Yeah.
if you open your message on LinkedIn after 2 days, you have 30 people making a pitch saying, oh, I'm trying to sell
Yeah.
you this. And that just means that every VP, every SVP in the world has interacted with 5 very average products. Like they have interacted with
Yeah.
products that promised they're going to change the world, but they were actually not going to do it. They probably just ran fast, built a thin wrapper around whatever was the core need. So when these players who are actually building something that is substantial, that is actually going to be groundbreaking, they go into a meeting room, they get all sorts of judgment passed on them. They're like, oh, so you are a text to SQL wrapper. Oh, so you are like that company, right? Like, and that's very demotivating for founders because I've spent time with them. They're like, okay, the world has worked against us. How do we crack our messaging, right? Like, what do we do so that people understand what we're doing is no longer just like a surface level hypothetical stuff. So the core question with all that context is that MVPs
Totally.
today might not do like necessarily cut it. Your MVP is getting a little more high fidelity. How do you build that trust as a product builder when you are pitching to someone who is a giant who has maybe had really bad experiences with average offerings?
Yeah. Yeah. That is a fantastic question. And so, honestly, this is one of the hardest things about B2B SaaS. And honestly, I think people don't talk about it enough about just like B2B SaaS products. Relationships matter, right? And the reason why I say that is getting your first customer is so important. It doesn't have to be a paying customer, but getting your first customer to say, I am willing to commit to your product and try it hell or high water. I will figure this out with you, right? Having that in place is so critical because as soon as you have a real customer case study of this person did this thing and here are the results and it is real and no one is BSing you, right? Like it's not like smoke and mirrors. Here's a real thing that they will put their name behind, right? That is when traction begins, right? And before that point in time, if you do not have it, it is incredibly hard to get started. I think there are so many B2B SaaS, let's say, under Series A or under Series B, where the entire difference of did they get product market fit or not rests solely on, did the founder already know their first customer before founding the company, right? Like, it is actually crazy how important it is for the founder to have someone that they can draw on as a customer to co-build the solution with, right? Because as soon as you have someone who's willing to co-build the solution with you in that MVP and really work through all the kinks and all the pains and really come out and say, hey, I'm going to back this person because I have worked with them. We have a strong relationship and like we will figure this out together. As soon as you have that and you have a real case study, it's so much easier, right? Whereas if you don't have anything, kind of it's that entire cold start problem, right? Of if people don't trust you, then they're not going to buy from you. And if they don't buy from you, then you don't have any names. And so people are still not going to buy from you, right? And so it's just so important to have that first customer to actually give you that validation. And so one of the things I think is incredibly important for anyone who's playing in B2B SaaS, it's not just, hey, do I think that I'm solving a real problem? But the question is, do I actually know someone that has this problem? And are they willing to work with me and be my first customer, whether it's paid or unpaid? I don't care. Do I have someone who's going to be my first customer? Right? And so one of the things that's actually really incredible about my time at Blend is I work with so many intelligent individuals, right? Like just so many world-class talents. And there are a lot of alumni from Blend who've since left and had these incredible companies spring up from the ground for seemingly no reason. And every time I ask them, like, oh, like, how did you get there? Right? Like, what was your entire trajectory? It's, I already knew this person had this problem. And I said, if I build something for you, will you use it? I don't care if you pay me. Just if I build it, will you use it? And I said, yes. And I built it and we did it. Right. And like, that was it. That was it in terms of all these conversations. It didn't matter what space it was. It didn't matter whether it was cybersecurity. It didn't matter if it was loan processing. It didn't matter if it was, CRMs, whatever it was. If they knew it, one person who is going to build with them hell or high water, actually commit to using that product and kind of work through all of the kinks, that company succeeded. And for all the other people who went out and started their own thing and they didn't have a customer in mind, all of those eventually failed. And these people, through no fault of their own, right, just like, hey, this thing didn't pan out. It's time to go look for a different venture instead. Right? And so I think that is just so important of having a customer to work with from the get-go is so crucial. And there's not a lot of other ways to get through there outside of human relationships. Right? I think that's one of the things that I think is very strange almost about product management is at the end of the day, everything is people. As much as we want to say that things are metrics and things are value propositions and things are, rational markets and capitalism, etc., it's all built on people, right? Like markets work off of people making individual decisions, right? Companies get born from people wanting to work together on some particular problem. It's all people. And so as soon as you have that one relationship with one person who believes in you and will be your customer and will use your product, as soon as you have it, you will have that traction. As soon as you don't have it, you don't have traction, right? And so I think that's just something that is so rarely said, I think, almost in like B2B SaaS product management. Like I haven't seen all that many essays or deep dives or interviews of just how important it is to have that first customer. And so I think a lot of folks kind of embark on this journey of, I'm going to build the best darn product there ever was because I understand the problem space so deeply. They build it and it is amazing, but no one trusts them because they didn't have the first customer to start with, right? And so that is just kind of the entire make or break difference. If you have that customer who's going to co-build with you, you will succeed. If you don't, you won't, right? And so that's just what I've personally seen. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can attest to it as a founder. I have been in a spot where it's very tough. Like you keep wondering, oh, we have this amazing product. Why is someone not using it? They have exactly the same problem. And they're not using it because you are a nobody. Now, there are multiple ways to do it. You could partner with the right people who get you into a room. You could run ads. You could like hire someone who has sold it to equivalent number of bigger players in the past who knows who to knock onto. But that all is only effective after the first 4 or 5 clients have been closed by you. And that 4 or 5 clients are actually left down to the founder, which a lot of founders realize later on that, oh my God, we need to get a logo that everyone knows about. It needs to be someone where you have like the stick on your website and everyone knows that, oh, these guys are working with Nike. And then that's very tough. Like you either spend time doing it. It's awesome. Clement, we are like, this probably is the longest episode I have done with someone in a long time, but I am loving our chat. Unfortunately, we are nearing the end. So I always ask this question to people. We are in an age today where there's a lot of new things happening, AI, tech. Is there any learning that you have which you would like to share with everyone in the audience? And is there anything that you are extremely excited about personally? So wherever we are, if you reflect back on your life, is there a learning and is there anything you are extremely excited about when you look back?
Yeah, totally. Fantastic questions. So the one thing that I want to point back to, and I've actually already talked about it a little bit, but it's just so important, is create value to capture value, right? Like if you want anything in your life, first figure out who needs something and solve that problem for them, right? And so whether you're trying to get promoted, whether you're trying to get a bigger team, whether you are trying to sell to a customer, whether you're trying to grow a following, whatever it is, anything in life, create value to capture value, right? I think a lot of times people begin with, hey, I would really love to get a promotion, right? It's like, oh, like I'm gonna go talk to my manager, like, oh, like the market has seen these different raises, and so I should have a raise because like it should just be fair. And it doesn't work that way, right? Because ultimately, all of us are employed to be able to unlock value for someone, right? Kind of our customers have headaches and we're paid to solve those headaches for them. Our bosses have headaches and we're paid to solve those headaches for them, right? And so no matter what it is that you want to do, you really want to make sure you understand what is value, right? Like, what is it that other people actually need, and give them that. And as soon as you give them that, everything becomes so much easier, whether it is being able to speak at a conference, whether it is being able to get promoted, whether it is getting to lead a much bigger team, whatever it is. As soon as you understand what is value and you deliver on that value, you will get value back in return, right? Because honestly, there's so like the thing that makes me relentlessly optimistic, right? And I know that a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, like, Clement, why are you such an optimist? This is so annoying, right? But the thing that I personally truly believe, because I've seen it time and again, people want each other to succeed, right? Like, as yes, like there's all these like theories out there, like, oh, people are selfish, da, 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 da. But anytime you make someone succeed, they're in it with you for the long run. They want you to succeed, right? Because if you don't succeed, then you're not going to be able to help them again later, right? And so it's in everyone's self-interest to make sure you succeed as soon as you've helped them succeed, right? So it's all about figuring out how to create that value and give it to other people, and that value will naturally come your way, right? Again, I didn't plan on growing a following, but because I created that value, I got a following, right? I didn't plan on getting promoted, but because I created all this value, I got promoted because they didn't want me to accidentally leave the company, right? And so that is just so important. It's I'll just create value to capture value is just like my core thesis of just everything that I've done on Earth and everything that I plan to continue doing on Earth. It's create value to capture value, right? So there's that. In terms of things that I'm really excited about, I think I'm just so excited that more and more people are really interested in product management and AI and data, because the more people who are jumping into these fields, the more diverse perspectives that we will have, and the better products will be there, the more compassionate things will be, right? I think, a lot of the time, like, kind of products reflect the people who built them, right? And I think there is a little bit of a monoculture when it comes to the products that were built in the past, right? Kind of, very similar kinds of people building very similar kinds of things. That's why there's all these different jokes about, hey, what's the next hottest startup? Oh, just look at problems that people have in Palo Alto, right? And so it's just like, it's a meme for a reason. And so because of that, right, like, I think it's so cool that, like, there are people who have reached out to me in Kenya, in Nigeria, in Vietnam, from Ukraine, saying, like, I am now going to be a product manager. How do I do this stuff for the first time? That's so cool, right? It's so cool that there are all these people who were previously not in product getting into product. And I think that will make every product so much more compassionate, so much more thoughtful, and not just thoughtful for its own sake, because a compassionate, thoughtful product ultimately creates that value and then captures that value for the business, right? So it all ties back together. And so I'm just so excited to see that there's so many more people embarking on this journey of product management and analytics and AI and data, because I think that is what will make the world a much more compassionate place, and we'll have much better products out there. So that's what I'm really excited about. Yeah.
That is an answer that we don't see very often here, and thank you for sharing that. Like, people always go in and talk about specific bits and pieces of technology. That's also equally valuable, but the perspective that you just brought in about people, it's super interesting. Like, there is a painful part of it where there is a lot of noise, as in random people coming and commenting on it, but then as they mature, you start seeing a very good uh, average chat in your feed and so on. And I noticed this because I've probably never shared it, but I was going through my timeline, and out of every 10 people, there would be one person who's saying, oh, I'm building this thing, buy this, sell this, comment, aha, and I'm going to send it to you in DM or something like that. And then I was like, okay, is this just me? So I went to someone who I really look up to. They have built a network over the last 15 years. They have sold companies. Like, they have a very well established niche, and like
Totally.
really well connected to people. And their timeline was so well. I was like, did you ever go through the phase where a lot of random things were popping up in your timeline? And it was like, yeah, all the time. It took me a while to weed that out, but trust it, if you focus on actually connecting with the right people, like, there's going to be a time where the average of 5 people in your network is going to be really good, and everything
Yeah.
you're running into is going to teach you. So everyone is on their journey. Clement, how can people reach out to you before we wrap this up?
Yeah, totally. So on LinkedIn, I'm Clement Kao. I'm pretty sure I'm the only Clement Kao on LinkedIn, right? So that should be pretty easy. And then outside of that, you can always find me at productteacher.com. So no spaces, no dashes, no capital letters, just productteacher.com. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. I will make sure I hyperlink all the things in the description. Clement, it was an absolute honor hosting you. I had some really fun conversations. I wish I could keep it going because there are a bunch of other questions that I have in my hand. Maybe we do that some other time. But thank you so much with your honest and candid answers. I hope you also enjoyed it equally.
I had a blast. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. And folks, if you're listening in, we have a bunch of newer episodes coming in. Please let us know who else would you like to see on the show. We are going to break it into different bits and pieces because I think what we had here was going to be published into like long articles at the very least if we wanted to. There's a lot of gem in here. But as always, we'll see you on the next episode of Just Crunch It. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching us.